Hello everyone, this is John Mark Johnson Jr. again, and this is another online article review, a lot like the one that I did for the article that was put out by some Catholics on refuting Sola Scriptura. This one is dealing with the issue of Mormonism, which is a fairly big issue where I live. I live in southeastern Idaho, in the Pocatello area, and Mormonism is pretty popular here. So if anyone wants to follow along with the article that I'm reading, it's found on mormon.org/beliefs/restoration. So if you want to follow along and see what I'm talking about, that's where you can find it. Mormonism is, like I said, a very big issue out here, and for Christians who are trying to live out their faith here, the Mormonism is kind of a shadow for a lot of us out here, and that a lot of the people here are Mormon. However, the problem that we as biblical Christians have with Mormonism out here is that, frankly, they get a lot of things wrong. And they misrepresent biblical Christianity pretty much every opportunity that they get. They misrepresent the Bible, they misrepresent Christian history, and when you do that, you're not exactly going to engender a lot of friends that are biblical historical Christians. We're not going to get along all that well. And going through this article that the Mormons put out, that becomes all the more clear in a great many respects. Alright, so the article starts off by claiming that Christ organized his church on earth. It starts out with a quote from John 14:6, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," and then says, Christ told his followers during his brief but powerful ministry on earth. This is what he told them. He said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And the article goes on to say, "It was a timely and needed message, since a few hundred years before his birth, many people had stopped living according to God's commandments." And this is where the difference between biblical historical Christianity and Mormonism, in a lot of ways, is really focused. Who was Christ? What did he do? What was his purpose? In the Bible, it is exceptionally clear what his purpose was. Now, you read an article that's put out by a Mormon, and they'll say he restored the gospel, and specifically he restored the gospel ordinances. He brought people back to following the commands of God. However, if you've actually read the New Testament, you know that pretty much the exact opposite is true. These people had the law. They had the commands of God. Unquestionably so. Why is it that Christ came? I think the Apostle Paul probably puts it best. In Galatians 3:11, he said that no one can be justified under the law. What did Christ come for? Christ came to justify us. The law does not justify anyone. The law does not save anyone. The law tells you of your need for salvation. It proclaims what God's standard is. It does not make you righteous, though. What did Christ do? He didn't come to reestablish a set of rules. They knew the rules. They had the records. The history was solid, and it's still solid today. We know what Moses taught. We know what people thereafter taught. There isn't any doubt about it. And the same was true in Christ's day. What is it that the purpose of Christ was? Was he bringing people back to following God's commandments, or was there a bigger issue there? And now, people had fallen away from God's commandments before in Israelite history, and God didn't have to send Jesus down to restore anything. Why is it that Jesus came down? It wasn't to restore lost ordinances. It wasn't to get people to live according to God's commands. Jesus was sent as our Savior. What is it that Jesus himself says in Mark chapter 10 and verse 41? "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." That's what he came for. His own stated purpose was not to lead people back to the law. They already had it. Yes, Jesus was in agreement with the law. The law is righteous. But his purpose, the reason why he came down, was to provide salvation. was to become that ransom, was to save many. But the Mormons do not realize that. Instead, they push ordinances. They do not see what Jesus' ministry was all about. And, of course, they don't recognize what Christ's own claims were. Like I said in Mark 10:45, it's very clear what he's saying. To give his life as a ransom for many. That's what his stated purpose was. It wasn't to bring people back to the commands. They had those. He didn't teach against them, of course, but that wasn't his purpose. His purpose was to become a ransom for many, his own stated purpose. And he says himself in Matthew 5:17, he came not to abolish the law and the prophets, not to abolish, certainly not to reiterate. He came to fulfill them, to bring them to a state of completion. That is, mankind fell into a state of corruption, fell into sin, a state of separation from God, all the way back in the Garden of Eden. God established the law to proclaim what is righteous and what isn't, and that man cannot be his own standard of righteousness. That there is an absolute standard, and it isn't our own. But knowing that there is a standard does not bring restoration. It does not bring freedom from sin. No, for that requires sacrifice. That requires an exchange of something that we do not have intrinsically of ourselves, but the infinite God who has everything does. Christ came as that exchange. He came as that ransom. He paid the price that we could not pay ourselves. That's the gospel message. He came to fulfill the law. The law itself proclaims righteousness. Christ came to fulfill the law by bringing in that righteousness, just as it says in Daniel 9:24. This is what Christ did. LDS message, not that. It does not start there with them. Yes, they would say that salvation isn't by works and those kinds of things, but when you actually listen to what they emphasize and what they think that Christ's purpose was, you quickly realize that they don't really believe that. They really do believe that the ordinance is part of salvation, rather than the ordinance is what pointed to the need for salvation, which is a very big distinction. Alright, so let's continue here. Alright, they go on and they start talking about the dark ages of Christianity. And they say, regardless of the valiant efforts of Christ's apostles and their faithful followers, the original church that Christ restored began to fade away. Members faced severe persecution, and all but one of the apostles were martyred. Here again, this is where the Mormons show that they have absolutely no idea of what Christian history actually teaches. All but one of the apostles were martyred. Where did they get this information? I wonder, where did this information come from? Where is this claim? Because I have right in front of me, right here, one of the many, many books that are out there that actually contain Christian history. This one is, in particular, is from the Hendrickson collection of the early church fathers. And guess what? It records what happens to the apostles. This is in a work that's accredited to Hippolytus, who lived in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, very near the time frame. And what does it say? Well, it does record that some of them were martyred, but the Apostle John, for example, fell asleep in Trajan's time at Ephesus. By the way, the Apostle John is the one that they think was not martyred, and in fact that he basically continued to live forever, but Christian history instead records that he did in fact die. Oh well, they kind of leave that one out. They leave out that he actually did die. Alright, what about Matthew? This work records that Matthew wrote the Gospel in the Hebrew tongue and published it at Jerusalem, and fell asleep at Hieres a town of Parthia. So Matthew did not die a martyr's death either. Jude, also called Lebbaeus, preached to the people of Edessa and to all Mesopotamia and fell asleep at Berytus and was buried there. So that's another one that was not martyred. Simon the Zealot fell asleep and was buried there at the age of 120 years. That was at Jerusalem, by the way. At 120 years of age. These people lived for a good long time. It wasn't Jesus, then the apostles were in place for a short time, and then everything went down. Instead, a lot of the apostles actually lived for a pretty long time. And so a lot of the people in the up-and-coming generations actually knew the apostles very well, and knew their teachings very well, because they lived for a long while, some of them at least. So there's multiple apostles that were not martyred. This is where the Mormons show their gross ignorance of church history and gross ignorance of basically anything that has to do with facts. And frankly, I find it extremely offensive that they misrepresent Christian history in this way. Alright, so all of the apostles but one are martyred. Well, that actually isn't true. But the article goes on to talk about a period of great apostasy, a great falling away. And like I said, there are multiple instances in the Bible where people fell away from the historical faith. However, it was always history that brought them back. That is, people would be reminded of what had been laid down from the beginning, and of course they had the record of it. And so they would be led back to it, even despite periods of apostasy. One really great example is in 2 Chronicles chapter 34, verses 18 through 21, when King Josiah is confronted with the law of the Lord. The book of the law is brought into him and read in his presence. He understands what he's hearing, and he laments. He tears his robes, and he says, "We are under a curse because we have not done everything according to this book." And he restored what was there in the first place. How did he know what was there in the first place? He didn't need a special revelation of it. An angel didn't need to come down and show him where some secret things were hidden. They were right there in front of him, and the record that they had always known, they'd just simply been ignoring it, was right there. He took it, and he actually did what it said he should do. Very, very, very simple. And most of the time, history is a lot simpler than people try to make it out to be. But this was normal. Now, more specifically though, if the apostles actually taught that there would be a great apostasy in which everything would be lost, immediately following their own time, which is what the Mormons typically teach, then why is it that Paul left instructions to Timothy to train up men who could in turn train others? Why did he set up this policy of one training another, training another, training another? This is in 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 2, by the way. Why did he set up this process if he thought that everyone was going to fall into apostasy? What would be the point in it? He obviously didn't believe that there was a great apostasy that was coming that would completely undermine everything. In fact, he left instructions on the assumption that things were going to continue. And that is the general premise of the biblical writers. Take a look at Jude, for example. There's only one chapter in Jude, but in verse 3 of Jude, Jude very clearly states, I'll just go ahead and read it. It's a very important verse in the Bible, and one that Mormons do not really address pretty much ever, for some fairly obvious reasons. So this is Jude, verse 3. Like I said, it only has one chapter. That's not why I'm not putting the chapter with it. But Jude, verse 3. Beloved, although I was very eager to write to you about our common salvation, I found it necessary to write appealing to you to contend for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. Once for all. It would only happen once, which means it couldn't be lost because then it would never ever be there again, because it was once for all delivered. It is not the faith that would be, brought back every few years. It was once for all delivered to the saints. The Greek word is hapax. And it literally means once as opposed to twice, thrice, etc. Hapax, once for all delivered to the saints. That goes in the face of everything that the Mormons try to teach on this. There was no great apostasy. It's just simply a myth. The teaching was there. Now, whether or not people actually listened to it in later years and they actually went back and figured out what was authentic and what wasn't, yeah, there was lots of people who didn't. In fact, in certain periods of time, it would be even the majority who didn't. But that doesn't mean that it was actually lost. Ignoring something is not the same thing as losing it. It wasn't lost. It was still there. Just like in the time of King Josiah, or more accurately, the time before King Josiah. They had access to the book of the law. They put it away in the temple, and basically they forgot about it. They'd come into a time where people didn't want to hear that kind of stuff, and where people didn't want to believe that kind of stuff, and so they put it on a back shelf. But in King Josiah's day, he tried to do what was right before the Lord, and so it was brought back out, and they lived according to it. Very typical. Alright, so also in the... It's just, this whole idea of this great apostasy is just ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. Okay, and then they have an image on their website that scrolls through different scenes throughout time. They have marked on it 32 AD, 33 AD, 70 AD, 325 AD, 15, 17, 18, 20. These are the dates that they go through and talk about. And on the 325 one, they talk about the Council of Nicaea. And they talk about the differences and opinions that existed in the church in 325 AD. And they greatly exaggerate it. Yes, there were differences of opinion, but they were not nearly as great as they try to make them out to be. The Council of Nicaea actually only dealt with two heresies. The primary one being the Arian controversy, and then I think Miletitism was the other one. I can't quite remember, but there's only two that they were dealing with. It wasn't a great diversity. It was pretty limited. And Arius and his crew only represented 3 leaders out of somewhere around 300 people who were in attendance. 3 out of roughly 300 is not exactly a great majority. It does not represent great diversity. But if you read the LDS article, and this particular Mormon article is put out by the LDS and not by one of the other groups, you don't get that impression. What they completely omit here is that in the modern, the Mormons are actually not any more unified. You can just look up list of sects in the Latter-day Saint movement, and you will get tons and tons and tons of groups. You could get the group that was established by Wycombe Clark, or by Houghton, or by Ezra Booth, or by Warren Parrish, and I'm reading these right off online sources. Isaac Russell, William Chubby, George M. Hinkle, Hiram Page, William Law. Did anyone know that Hiram Page actually established his own church? That one's kind of interesting. Lauren C. Woolley, Elvin Kingston, Rulon C. Alfred, and the list just goes on and on and on. In fact, it's relatively easy to find at least 85 different Mormon groups that are either were in existence or are still in existence today. Frankly, this is going to happen in the world that we live in. We live in a fallen and broken world. Why? Because Adam and Eve sinned. And that ushered death, decay, and destruction into this world. Both moral and natural sin and decay. Our world is broken, we're broken, and guess what? We're not all going to agree. That is, man in his natural states is an enemy of God. This is what it says in Ephesians chapter 2. This is what Paul wrote. That man in his natural state is God's enemy. Not his friend. This ekthroi. God's enemies. This is how we are in our natural state. And because of this, we're going to come to a diversity of opinions. And it doesn't matter what time you're in, and it doesn't matter what group you're talking about. In fact, most religious groups that are out there will usually have at least 3 main branches. Why? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And each time you're going to usually have at least 3 main branches. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but usually the average comes out to around 3. Take Christianity, for example. There's 3 main branches of Christianity. There's Eastern Orthodoxy, there's Roman Catholicism, and there's Protestantism. Take Muslim groups, for example. There's the Sunnis, the Shiites. I can't remember if the Twelvers are under those or another one, but there is a third one. I can't remember at the moment. Also the same thing with the Jews. You have the Orthodox, and then there's a couple other groups that are listed under Judaism. But you usually have at least 3 groups. And the same thing is true of the LDS. They have 3 main groups and a host of other smaller groups. But 3 main groups. They have the LDS, they have the RLDS, which is now called the Community of Christ, and then they also have the FLDS, the Fundamentalist Mormons. All of these are different groups with differing beliefs, some core beliefs that are relatively similar. They all hold that Joseph Smith was a prophet and that kind of thing. But their beliefs from there can vary quite widely in their practice and what they actually do. And then there's also some real spin-off groups that just kind of go off into weird places, like the True Gnostic Church that is sponsored by Archie Wood. That is a Mormon breakaway group that disagreed with Mormonism and they became their own thing. Another one is Christopher Nemelka's group, and they've claimed to translate the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon, which is a very interesting claim, to be certain. But yeah, there's a huge variety in the LDS faith and in most religions, simply because we live in a fallen and a broken world, and people are not going to agree. Instead, you're responsible. Claiming that you belong to the one true church doesn't work, because you simply don't have assurance of that in this life. Instead, you're responsible for the choices that you make, and you cannot defer to this authority or to that authority. You're responsible for your own choices, and you can choose to follow God or not. I can't control what everyone else does. If people want to believe that Jesus was really a giant leprechaun and that he, farted gold dust or whatever, I can't really change their opinion on that. All I can do is make sure that I am living in accordance with what God has provided, and living according to the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints in the words of Jude. And remember, that's Jude 1 verse 3. There's only one chapter in Jude, but you get the point. Now, also in the article, further down, they like to talk about the unbroken chain. Where it says in the article, authority to lead his church restored, they say this: he and the church's other apostles trace their priesthood authority. They're talking about their modern prophet, Thomas S. Monson. He and the church's other apostles trace their priesthood authority back to Jesus Christ in an unbroken chain of ordinations. Regardless of whether or not that's true, my point here is that that is not a unique claim. You look at any of the traditional churches, whether you look at the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, the Assyrian Church, or the Oriental Orthodox Church, and it also includes the Anglicans and also includes the Lutherans, they can all trace their ordinations all the way back to the original 12 apostles. All of them can do that. That's not a unique claim. Oh, we're the ones who have all of this direct line of ordinations. You're not alone in that. Does that mean that all of the groups are now suddenly right because they can all trace their history back to the beginning? No. It's possible to start on the right path and deviate from it, regardless of whether or not you have a train of teaching that goes back. The branches and branches can get further away from the root. And that's the problem that we as Protestants have with a lot of the traditional churches. Yes, they do have a direct line of teaching, but that doesn't mean that that direct line of teaching actually maintained what was there from the beginning. Each successive generation can get a little bit off and a little bit further off and a little bit further off and a little bit further off. Just because they have a line of ordination does not make it true. This kind of genetic stability theory just doesn't work in any real sense. It just doesn't hold. Just because you come from the right place doesn't mean that you're going to the right place. It doesn't hold. It doesn't work. It's a nice claim, but it's not unique, and therefore, in and of itself, it certainly is not any kind of guarantee of authenticity. Not if multiple groups can claim it and still reach different conclusions. It doesn't work. Now, another interesting claim that occurs towards the end of the article, but still under under the section that talks about the Book of Mormon specifically, it says that the effect of Christ's visit to the people in the Americas, they believe that Christ came and visited the people in America, which there is no corroborating evidence on that one whatsoever, but they believe it nonetheless. They believe that the effect of his visit, and this is their words, the effect of his visit was so profound that for nearly 170 years the people lived in peace and righteousness. I find that claim really interesting. In the old world, the effect of Christ was lost almost immediately, according to the LDS. But in the New World, it survived for 170 years, unfettered, basically. Now, frankly, I find this really hard to swallow. Something that we have no corroborating evidence for, that we're supposed to take basically on faith, that it lasted for 170 years. However, we can go to the Christian history and can see what their teachings were throughout the centuries. We have Christian records that go all the way back to the 1st century, basically all the way back to the New Testament time period, and we can trace it forward, and we can trace what was taught in the beginning and what was taught at the end, and we can see where the deviations happen and what's consistent and what isn't. It's very easy to do. Christian history is very rich and very full. It's very easy to do these kinds of things, and it's very clear that the teachings didn't stop with the apostles, but instead progressed basically right up until the present. There have always been groups that have believed the core doctrines of biblical historical Christianity, and I do have videos out on those in case you're wondering, or at least some videos out on them. I haven't finished all of them, but there are some videos that I have out on there. And like I said, you can trace these beliefs all the way back. There's a consistent line of teaching in Christianity in the old world, so to speak. But we have to disbelieve all of that and all of that history and all of the tracing that you can do, and believe that instead there is this great apostasy, which there's no evidence for, and instead believe that these people in the Americas were able to keep the faith for at least 170 years, whereas the people in the old world couldn't. No. That's the kind of story that you tell as a bedtime story, and not a very good one at that. This is the kind of thing that you try to propagate if you want to set yourself up as the standard. Christianity doesn't work that way. We are subject to history. We are a historical faith, and to answer what is a part of the historical faith, you need to look at history. They want to get rid of all of that because, frankly, their doctrine is not the same as the historical doctrine. They want to teach something separate from that, and so they divorce themselves as far from the Christian history as they possibly can. Because if they were tied to Christian history in any legitimate sense, they wouldn't be allowed to believe the things that they believe. They simply couldn't support it. So the way that they get around it is by saying, oh, there was this great apostasy, and everything that was important was lost, although there's no solid evidence for this whatsoever. But that's where they go. I find it just totally fantastic. Now, one of the basic tenets of the Mormon faith they start getting to down at the end of this section, and one of the last sections is titled, God is your loving heavenly Father. That's what it's titled. And they believe this very literally. They actually believe that we are God's spirit children. That is, that God got together with his God wife, or possibly wives, depending on which version of the story you believe, and which period of Mormon history you're talking about. God got together with his God wife or God wives, and they had a bunch of spirit babies, and we're them. That's what they believe. They really do believe that. We are the essentially literal children of God. Now, I find that really fantastic because Paul himself says that we're not natural children of God. He says instead we receive an adoption as sons. He says that in Romans 8:15. Now, along with all of this is the belief, is the Mormon belief that God is basically just a glorified man. And I say just a glorified man, because anything less than the complete supernatural being who's the creator of all things and all existence is just something. You are merely a part of creation. You are not the creator if you do that. And they believe that God is a part of creation, that he did not create everything in all existence, everywhere, and every type of existence. Instead, they believe that he had gods who came before him, and that he is one of their children, who in turn were begat by other gods, who in turn came from other gods, and on and on and on and on the cycle goes. Now, there's actually some mathematic problems with that, and for people who are aware of how infinity works and what happens if you try to start from negative infinity and work up to any specific iteration, you know it doesn't work. It's literally mathematically impossible, but I'm talking basically to Mormons here, so I'm going to have to simplify things down really, really far. But like I said, the authors of the Bible did not act like we were the literal children of God at all. Yes, that was a euphemism that was used, and it's a euphemism that a lot of Christians still use today. But you have to remember that they also qualified that euphemism by saying that we are adopted. We are not natural children. And also, the Bible does not say that God is just like us. Instead, the teaching from the Bible is completely opposite on that one. What is it that Christ himself says in John 4:24? He says that God is spirit. Now, this verse, of course, creates all sorts of problems for the LDS, and they basically say, well, that one wasn't transmitted correctly. It wasn't translated correctly. And the Joseph Smith translation adds other things to it. But frankly, for the Joseph Smith translation, there has never been any support found. And this one I am somewhat qualified to speak to because I know the Greek text. I know all the major variants that are in there. And there's nothing that supports his claim on this one at all. He created a corrected version of John 4:24. But like I said, it's not supported by any Greek manuscript evidence whatsoever. And we have Greek manuscripts that basically go throughout all of Christian history. You would think that somewhere back in the line, somebody would have known. But there's literally not a shred. And we have manuscripts, biblical manuscripts, that actually go even back before the time of the New Testament. We actually have some Old Testament manuscripts, Septuagint manuscripts, Greek Old Testament manuscripts that go back before the time of Christ. You think that someone would mention this somewhere, that God actually isn't spirit. But no, that was never the teaching. You look through any of the early Christian teachings, and they never hold to that. God the Father is spirit. What was special about Christ is that he is the incarnate Son of God, that God took on flesh for our sake, of Philippians chapter 2. He, being in the very form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but instead made himself nothing and took on flesh for our sakes. That is the teaching of the Bible, that God is not man. The amazing thing is that he became man for us. Christ was fully God and fully man, and the two are not synonymous in any way, shape, or form. Man is not simply a development leading up to godhood. They are completely different, and what was amazing about Christ is that the two come together in Christ. It is an amazing thing. And this is why the people who interacted with Jesus had such a hard time with his claims, and they picked up stones to stone him, say, for example, in John chapter 8, when he said, before Abraham was, I am. What was the claim that they kept bringing against him? You, a mere man, claim to be God. These are the kinds of things that they would accuse Jesus of. They understood that there was a hard and fast separation. What was amazing about Jesus is that he was both. He is the God-man. He has a fully divine nature and a fully human nature. Why? To become the perfect sacrifice for sinful man. He took on the form of a man, not thinking it robbery to be equal with God, in order to save us for our salvation. Like I said, Philippians chapter 2, it's a great read. Pay attention to it. There's lots of important doctrine there. And it's called the Karma Christi, as one of the traditional names for it. But this is all very well understood in Christian history. I do not find anything, frankly, in this article to be convincing, but at the same time, I know that there will be people who are convinced by articles like this. I know it. Why? Because a great many people who would call themselves Christians these days have no clue about Christian history. They don't know what was actually taught. They'll read something like this and they say, oh yeah, the Christian church did lose its way for a while, and I guess it makes sense that God would reestablish it and restore it, and yep, that sounds really good. They don't know anything about the history of what actually went on or what teachings were maintained and which ones weren't and all that kind of thing. Instead, they let somebody else do a synopsis for them, and they let other people be an authority on this who have no clue what they're talking about. They don't even know which one of the apostles were martyred or not. They got that completely wrong. They don't know their Christian history. They're not qualified to speak to it. Oh, there was such great diversity in the church at the time of the Council of Nicaea. There was only 2 heresies, and as far as the actual number of people who were represented at Nicaea who actually had a dissenting opinion, there was a grand total of 3 out of roughly 300. Yeah, there's such great diversity in Christian belief. No, that's ridiculous. Just flat out ridiculous. It's a complete misrepresentation of what Christianity has been. And granted, I do not support everything that Christians have historically done. Okay, crusades and those things, that was a terrible idea. Some of the doctrines that did come down the pike that people tried to advocate, awful ideas. Okay, but when you look for the consistent threads that go clear through history, you find that they are indeed very consistent. And you find that the core fundamentals of the faith have never been lost. Why? Because the scriptures haven't been lost. Yes, there have been times where they've been darkened, times when they've been ignored, but they were never lost. In fact, the Greek New Testament is the best supported work of ancient antiquity, bar none. Okay, if you're going to call the New Testament into doubt and say, oh, great many plain and precious truths were lost, then you're going to have to call into doubt every other ancient document and say that great and precious truths were lost from all of them. We don't know what Herodotus said. It's just a handful of manuscripts that were written, hundreds and hundreds of years after the time of Herodotus himself. We don't know. We can't know what any of them said. We don't know what Tacitus said. We don't know what Livy said. We don't know what any of these other ancient writers said. That's ridiculous. No one would be that suspicious about any of these things. You go and you study history books that relate to these time periods, and their major source is going to be people like Tacitus and Livy and Herodotus and these folks. This is how we know most of our Greco-Roman history, is from what is, by comparison with the Greek New Testament, very poorly supported documents. But they're still considered substantial in any scholarly sort of fashion, and people regularly use them to say, okay, what happened in Greco-Roman history? The Bible has that much support and many times more, especially the New Testament. And when people claim that great many precious truths have been lost, I just have to sit here and laugh because they don't know the manuscript history. They don't know how consistent the manuscripts are and how easy it is to tell what is and what isn't. It's not like we're in great doubt about this. I've done calculations of our confidence in the Greek New Testament myself, and I can very confidently say that it's at least 99.4. There's only about 1,000 words total in the Greek New Testament out of roughly 140,000 that are greatly debated to any extent. But even saying that maybe we're wrong on those 1,000, the alternates for them do not change any of the doctrines. So even if we are completely wrong, it still doesn't actually change anything, which is amazing. But yet people try to claim that, so much has been lost. This is ridiculous. Okay, the Muslims claim this. Of course, the Mormons claim this. Pretty much a lot of atheistic and agnostic groups claim this. This is a very normal accusation, but it's the least tenable of all the accusations that are brought against Christianity. Oh, that old book, it's so unreliable. It's been translated and retransmitted so many times. Who could possibly know what it originally said? Well, guess what? We don't have just the final version. We don't have the final form that came down at the end. We actually have manuscripts from every major epoch of Christian history, which means we can actually look at it not just from the end point, but we can actually look at it from the side, and we can see what happened all the way down the line. It makes it very easy to reconstruct the text. We have more support for the Bible than any other document of ancient antiquity. There's roughly 10,000 manuscripts that support the Old Testament, and that's a fairly conservative number, roughly to 20,000 that support the New Testament. And again, that's a relatively conservative estimate. There's just nothing that compares. And yet people have the audacity to claim, oh, these things were lost. They usually have no clue what they're talking about. And the LDS are no different on that one. They were born in a time where people had largely ignored Christian history, and they were born out of an ignorance of Christian history. And because of that, they speak of things that they do not know. So I'm not actually personally angry with individual Mormons. Right? They don't know what they don't know. But I am very angry with Mormon leaders who I know have access to Christian history and could study it, but simply choose not to. They are willingly ignorant. And frankly, that irks me to a great extent. And I will be very bold here. Thomas S. Monson, the one who is calling himself a prophet, if you ever get a chance to listen to this video, I call you to repentance. Because what your religion is doing, what you're leading, is in fact misleading. You are propagating lies in the name of God. Stop it. It is wrong, it is detestable, it is not godly. Don't claim that it is. Now, thank you for listening to this. I know it's a lot to take in. And frankly, this is definitely not one of my happier article reviews. But I think it's nonetheless very important. Why? Why is this so important? Because truth matters. There is a real Christian history out there that can be studied for those people who care to. The truth can be known. And that's what the question of Christianity ultimately is. What is it that Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1? He says, the Jews, they look for signs. The Greeks, they look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified. We don't teach miracles. We don't bring great and mighty signs for people. That's not what the emphasis is. Yes, Christians do believe in the miraculous, and always have. But that's not where the emphasis is. That's not where the justification of our faith is. And it's not like with the Greeks. Great wisdom, great philosophy. Making a really good argument for it. No. Ultimately, Christianity is a historical question. What actually happened? And what is it that Paul preached? Christ crucified. He says, this is the historical fact. You're a sinner. You are an enemy of God. But God in His grace provided you knowledge of who you are before Him by giving us the law. But the law only tells us of what our status is. It does not save us. So to save us, He Himself stepped into human history and became the propitiation, as it says in 1 John chapter 2. He became the propitiation, the hilasmos, the sacrifice, placating the wrath of an angry God, the wrath that we are due as enemies of God. Christ stepped in. God in flesh stepped into human history to take on the wrath that is due us. And because of that, you can now live a freed life. What does it say? What does it say? What does the Bible actually say about this? In Jude. Jude only has one chapter, like I said. Starting in verse 24, this is what Jude, the brother of the Lord, said. Now to Him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to present you blameless before the presence of His glory with great joy, to the only God, our Savior, through Jesus Christ our Lord, be glory, majesty, dominion, and authority for all time, and now and forever. Amen. What does it say? He is the one who keeps you from stumbling. He is the one who presents you blameless with great joy. The only God. The only God is the one who keeps you. The Christian message is a historical message about your salvation. You are a sinner. You are God's enemy, but God loved you so much that He died for you. He didn't send His Son to die for you. He died for you. And that incarnation we call the Son, the descendant self of God. The Greek word huios, which is usually translated as son, literally means descendant, or descended self, or descended one. It's not separate. Jesus is not separate from God the Father. He is God the Father before us, as the Apostle John puts it in. It's not the Apostle John, but the Apostle Paul says in Colossians 1:15, Christ is the image of the invisible God. He is God made flesh for us. He stepped into history to save you, to die for you. Just as it says in Mark 10:45, He became the ransom to save many. That's the Christian message. That's the historical fact. That's the historical question. And if you accept that, if you accept that God died for you so that you could be reunited, so that He could keep you from stumbling, then you understand the historic faith. But if you try to add to that message, if you try to change what that is and add things to it that were never there, and you try to change what that history is, then you have no respect for who God is. God is a historical God, a God who is subject to inquiry, a God who allows Himself to be inquired of in a historical fashion. He is a God who gives evidence of Himself throughout history, throughout time. If you don't believe these, you believe in an incredibly small God. And ultimately, that really is the distinction. Mormons believe in a very small God compared to Christians. And yes, there is a difference. Yes, you believe in Jesus and you love Jesus, but guess what? So do the Muslims. They believe in Jesus too. That doesn't make them Christian. Let us define our own word, thank you. Christian comes from the Greek word Christianos, and it literally means what belongs to Christ. There's a reason why Christ is referred to as Lord in the New Testament so often. It comes from the Greek word Kyrios, which literally means owner, master. The one who has legal right regarding his property. Why? Because He paid the price for you. It is not for no reason that the New Testament says that you are bought at a price. Tell me, do you actually see yourself as the property of Christ? Because that's what the Bible says. That's the historic message. You are bought at a price. If that offends you, you don't have anything to do with the Christian message. If you think you are a natural son of God and not an adopted son of God, then you have completely obliterated Paul's message. You've completely obliterated Christ's message. You have no standing in the historical faith whatsoever. And like I said, Monson, if you hear this, you need to repent, because you are wrong. Now, for everyone else who hears this, I challenge you to consider what I say and actually investigate the history for yourself. Obviously, I can't make decisions for people, but I can do what is in accord with Scripture. And that is to preach the good news. That's what the gospel is. It's not a set of ordinances. It's good news. That yes, we stand as God's enemies, condemned under the law, but Christ, the ransom, the propitiation, brought us freedom. And because of that, and only because of that, we are God's freedmen for those of us who accept it. If you would like to accept God, if you would like to become a part of real historic Christianity, then this is your template. Romans chapter 10 and verse 9. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. It is very simple. Do you believe the historic message or not? Do you accept the historical reality of what I'm saying, or do you reject it? Is it just a myth and a fable? Is it good moral teaching, or is it true? Did it actually happen? And are you willing to stake your eternity on that? That's the question. I'm not sugarcoating it. I'm not going to dress it up. I'm not going to make a long philosophical argument about it. I'm not going to show you great signs and wonders. This is the history. And either that history is correct or it isn't. That's the argument that the Apostle Paul made in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And if it's good enough for him, it certainly has to be good enough for me. Do you believe in the historic Jesus or not? Investigate the history. That's my challenge to you. Go with God and be blessed.